Most research proposals don't fail because the student or the project idea is weak. They fail because the student is guessing the structure, what the supervisor wants, or what belongs in each chapter. Still, you're often just expected to do it without actually being taught. The pressure is immense, as this single document is your ticket to admission, supervision, and potentially even funding. In this video, we are going to walk you through a clear, step-by-step research proposal framework that we've refined over years of working with postgraduate students. You'll learn what actually goes into each section, why each section exists, and how to make decisions before you start writing, so that your proposal reads as focused, coherent, and defensible, not rushed or stitched together. If you're working on a master or PhD proposal and want a structure that you can actually rely on, this video will save you lots of confusion. Before we dive in, a quick introduction. I'm Dr. Jessica Strijdom, and I'm with founder of Grad Collective and dissertation coach, Dr. Anand Pari. Between us, we've worked with over 300 postgraduate students, supporting them from confusion and overwhelm to successful submission through a structured coaching process and academic editing. This framework is built from the patterns we've seen where students struggle and what actually helps them to write clear and defensible research proposals. With that context, let's step back and look at what a research proposal really is and what it is not. A research proposal is actually not just an administrative formality. It's also not a mini version of your thesis or dissertation. At its core, the proposal is a persuasive academic argument. But you're not just writing a plan, you're actually making a pitch. You are being asked to convince your reader that your study is worth approving. To be successful, your proposal must persuasively argue for 3 critical points: clarity, justification, and feasibility. When the review panel is looking at your proposal, they will essentially be asking these questions. First, for clarity, they want to know what exactly are you studying, and just as importantly, what are you not studying. There should be absolutely no ambiguity about your research questions or boundaries. Second, justification. Why does this research matter? What gap or problem does it actually address? Your big idea is worthless without a big why. You must really demonstrate that you're filling a genuine gap in the existing literature and that the outcome of your work will add real value to the field or industry. This is your opportunity to clearly define what your project is focused on and what gap the project is addressing. Thirdly, feasibility. Can this study realistically be completed by you within the available amount of time that you have with the available resources? You have to prove that you possess the necessary skills and a realistic plan to execute this project within the given constraints of time, money, resources, and help available to you. Also access to data, perhaps. Even the most brilliant project idea will be rejected if it seems over-ambitious or implausible. If your proposal answers these 3 important questions, clearly, it's absolutely doing its job.
Now, let's look at the format you're expected to structure your proposal or your project pitch. The template that we have developed at Grad Collective is not designed to be filled in mechanically. It is designed to help you think clearly before you actually start writing. I will go in more depth with this template in a bit, but I just want to emphasize that unlike generic proposal templates that exist out there, which most of the times list headings, this one uniquely embeds decision logic, guidance, and examples to help you understand why each section exists, what role it plays in the overall argument, and how it connects to the rest of the proposal, which is something that we have seen students struggle with.
Using this proposal, you're not expected to fill out the proposal as it is section by section. Actually, we're going to jump between sections. We recommend that you start with chapter 2 before you write the introduction, which is chapter 1. And you'll understand a little bit later why exactly that's necessary.
Absolutely. I should also mention here that you will see as you walk through the template, it includes guidance notes, sometimes a colored text inside the document. It can also be a comment, like inline comments. These are really to support your thinking and your writing process. So it's obvious they are not part of your submission. So you should always make sure you delete those comments, leaving a proposal that reflects your own work, research proposal isn't a collection of separate sections. It's a single, connected argument. Each chapter does have dependencies with the other one. For example, chapter 1 on a high level basically defines your problem. It's your introduction chapter. Chapter 2 is your literature review, which essentially explains what is already known and what are some of the gaps. Chapter 3 explains study will address those gaps that you have identified from your chapter 2 literature review in a more realistic and defensible way. Over the years, working with hundreds of students, we've seen students don't pay attention to the university requirements. At least I've seen a large number of proposals get returned or delayed, not because the research is weak, because they don't meet the basic university requirements. It can be simple things like word limits. Some universities do provide their own templates, so it's mandatory that they follow the proposal structure. Formatting rules, APS 7, and then the most critical of all is the originality checks, your plagiarism and your AI score, right? So in this table, we have made it very simple for you that you have been asked to capture these key information from your university or your program handbook. Please note, some universities have very clear policies around AI-assisted writing, and missing those can cause serious issues later. Please complete this section fully. Think of it as setting the rules of the game before you start playing.
There is a guidance comment where you call it a pre-flight checklist, and I really like this idea. This is your checklist to make sure that you're going to get off the ground in good spirits and knowing what you have to do. Essentially, your research proposal is gonna make a first impression to your supervisors or to the panel who is evaluating the project. If you present a spotless research proposal, it actually makes a really good first impression. So on top of arguing your project idea very well, this little table helps you just ensure that you already have taken all the steps that you possibly could to get ahead in the game. The other thing that I want to mention here, the word count. More is not always better. In this case, you want to be concise and brief and be able to, in a short amount of words, define your research problem very well.
Absolutely. At the proposal stage, know that your title is a working title, not a final one. Its role is simply to communicate the focus and the scope of the study very clearly. Do not try to be clever, perfect, or permanent, because it can change based on the feedback that you may receive, right? One of the common mistakes we have seen students make is they try to lock in their title a little too early. Especially with the AI tools, they would just brainstorm little ideas and they would just pick and choose one of those. But in practice, your literature review brings a lot of clarity once you start reviewing your literature, and you can clearly see what is already known, debated, and missing. You need to take a moment to look at this table, G2. You'll notice that it is structured to help you think through what your title is communicating. Please use this table or this framework as a thinking aid.
While you want it to be descriptive, you also want to keep it short. So essentially, you want to include the aspects of your study, define some boundaries, and if possible, mention the methodology. But you did propose some examples. Perhaps we can have a look at those to illustrate the point.
Absolutely. So in this example, what is being studied, it's about employee burnout, right? And then we look into what is the focus? What are you trying to do here? It's about early career healthcare workers are really a focus group that we have, right? And in what context, in what setting? Well, it's happening in public hospital settings. From what perspective? This is basically the main angle. It's more on the organizational support practices, and then using what broad approach. It's kind of optional, but you could mention what kind of studies do you want to follow. Is it quantitative, qualitative, or a mixed method approach, which we will discuss in detail in chapter number 3.
All right, so once you've completed your pre-flight checks and you're ready to move on, you will see that here we have a dynamic table of content that you'll be able to use. Just a quick note, it's very important that you update the table of content once you have completed at the end. So once you've completed everything, you'll come back here and you'll just update it so that it shows your own titles and your own section headings. So moving on from the table of content, chapter 1 will be your introduction. This chapter will quickly introduce your study, or efficiently. I want to use the word efficiently because essentially The introduction, or the chapter 1, is like a summary that places the research question or the research problem that you're going to be studying in context. So the introduction serves to really provide context and to clearly define and just put in place your problem statement or research questions and objectives. So we're not going to start here. We want to start with chapter 2. We want to move on and dig into the literature review first before writing your chapter 1, because actually your research problem will emerge from chapter 2 after you have completed your literature survey. So basically, when you're writing chapter 2, just in brief, you'll start broad and you'll narrow it down, and the final conclusion of your literature review will actually be your research problem. So now we'll move on, and I'll let Dr. Anand explain a little bit more in depth how you can approach a proper chapter 2, a proper literature review.
So chapter 2 is literally the intellectual engine of your proposal. Its purpose is not to summarize articles, but rather show that you understand the research landscape well enough to justify your study. Table G4 essentially help you to develop your chapter 2 by showing all the steps that's included in developing a literature review. It starts with that basic question, where to look for articles. So these days we have some AI-assisted discovery tools, and all the traditional databases, some of the credible ones, are all listed here for you. And then the step 2, essentially, how to find the articles. You have to develop a focused keyword combinations that could be based on the concept that you're looking at, the population, the context. So just develop those keyword combinations and start looking for it. And know that searching is a looping process, and it's not a single task. So you have to do it a bit iteratively to get the best sources or the articles that you're looking for. And once you have the articles, organize them. I always suggest that you use some referencing tools like Mendeley or Zotero, and you can color code them, or you can create folders and store these sources so that it's more easy to review them thematically, which is your step number 4, because here you group studies based on the ideas. After reading multiple sources, try to identify some recurring themes, the debates, some perspectives, and each theme should represent a shared idea and will later become a subsection in your chapter 2. Now, once you have the sources collected, organize them thematically, then you can apply this most popular and very easy meal framework. And this framework will help you write clear, structured paragraphs. And we'll talk more about the meal framework in a bit with some examples. And then the 6th step is basically you summarize them effectively. You synthesize at the end of each theme or the subsection that you have created so far. And then at the end, it's all about how the literature review informs the topic selection. So you refine and validate your research topic. And as you synthesize the themes and identify what is well understood versus what remains unclear, a focused research topic should emerge. And this is all about what we discussed in the beginning, that what exists, what is missing, and what has been debated. This is the point. Step 7 is the point where you start getting a lot more clarity on what you should be doing. What kind of methodology should I choose? What has happened in the past? Jessica, I think this is one of the most important steps, and perhaps the most exciting one after all the hard work of reading.
Yeah, exactly. This is where everything is going to be coming together. And actually, as we said before, where the gap will emerge. If you have read wide enough and you have narrowed down your reading on grounds of those topics of relevance, then what's going to happen is actually the gap of what is missing is going to be really evident. And this is what you want to achieve. You want to actually write a literature review that is an argument to motivate your problem. You want to get to that point where you actually have really well motivated the problem, since you are writing a proposal. Here the literature review that you will present here is not going to be the same as the one in your dissertation. Here the literature review is actually focused on clarifying and really demonstrating the research problem. So the entire argument that you're building in this literature review has to be in support of that. So I want to just point out a problem that we often get as feedback from students as supervisor is that literature reviews might be too descriptive. And this is something that's really easy to fall into when you're not properly executing these steps that we're giving in this table, and you end up just writing like a history of what exists in the field. And this is what you don't want. You don't want to just give a history of what's been done by who. You want to actually build an argument here. So you might include some work of some people, but everything in support of and relevant to your specific research question or research problem.
Absolutely. And then comes that big question that I often receive, where how do I write this? Because I've read a lot of literature. I don't know how to summarize it, right? One of the framework that's very well known is MEAL framework, where M stands for main idea of the literature, E stands for the evidence, A stands for the analysis, and L stands for the link back to your original problem. So the MEAL framework provides a simple, discipline neutral way to structure academic paragraphs so that each paragraph makes a clear point, it is supported by an evidence, it demonstrates analytical thinking, and it connects back to the broader argument.
I just want to point out that academic writing is a specific skill that you will practice and perfect over time. If you are just starting out, maybe it might seem strange to you, but this is a skill that you will build, and you will use this type of writing throughout your academic career. If you want to continue with research, it's really important that you master it. But it's basically just presenting information in a structured way. And there are different frameworks, but the one that we are recommending is the MEAL framework, as we have found that it's easiest to apply with the hundreds of students that we've actually already helped. So it's easy to learn and easy to apply, and we'll basically be explaining how to learn this type of writing skill through the examples that we see here in the template.
Very important, yes. Thank you, Jessica. And then we are providing you the structure of the literature review that starts with introduction and the overview of your research domain that you would like to focus on in this proposal. And then comes that thematic review that we discussed, where you collect your sources, you're grouping these sources based on the themes that you have identified. Could be the arguments, debates, patterns that you have seen emerge as you read. So then you organize them as like thematic title number 1. Just to take an example here, one of the themes could be organization support as a protective factor against burnout. Similarly, we can have different themes that you have identified during a literature review. And this is perhaps one of the most important part of organizing your literature. It also gives that good impression that you took that effort to really classify, categorize, and build this.
I just want to add that it's important for us to choose themes that are in support of your research question, your research problem, and then structure them in a way that we are going from more general to most focused. So the largest scope to the scope that's most relevant to your specific research problem. Since you are, like we said before, you're basically telling a story. You're explaining and motivating the story of this research problem. You're not just randomly listing the themes. You want to arrange them in an order that actually tells the story of coming to the point of your research problem. Yeah.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Then you can explain your theoretical and conceptual foundation if that applies in this proposal. And then comes the critical synthesis of the literature.
This section here actually is super important to illustrate your critical thinking skills. This is where you want to, after you've explained the story, you now want to show that you can question it and you can think critically about it. So here is where you're contrasting opinions. You're really discussing the gap. So basically, through critical thinking and this critical synthesis, you will arrive at the research problem. So this section is actually really key to motivate why your research is necessary.
Absolutely. As we said, this is part of the process. As you start reading, as you started seeing the patterns, you started feeling like, well, this person have done this. The other researcher have looked into this, but nobody has looked into this. Perhaps this could be an opportunity for me to advance the existing body of research. So that's a kind of like an experience or the feel that we would expect as you start reading broad and as you start identifying the right sources. And in this section, you make an attempt to clearly articulate the gaps, whether it is contextual, methodological, theoretical, or population-based. And as I said, the gaps should emerge naturally as you read through the literature. And also, it's important that you avoid claiming things like no study exists, This is the first studies, because perhaps you may have only read like 10 or 15 literature. That's not enough to actually make such solid claims, right? So just I would think to keep the language very neutral at this point, because as we've said in the beginning, it should be defensible, right? If you make some solid claims in your proposal that this is the novel approach, a novel idea, you might get into some arguments with your committee or your professor.
Could I add here that at this point you want to be really specific? Like you have to nail that justification, be very specific about what you actually want to study. A very broad or general motivation is going to be the death of your proposal, because you want something that really stresses the specific need for it. So don't use a large overall context, like, for example, work on this topic has been done in this and this country, but not in my country. This is not necessarily a good motivation. You want to say why doing it in your country is necessary. Like you have to go very into depth in building and supporting and demonstrating why the research in your context is necessary.
Then comes the summary. Essentially, you briefly recap all the key themes and the gaps that you've identified in this section. You can explicitly connect the literature review to your research problem and your research objective with the questions that by now you might have figured out or may have some ideas on which direction you would like to take. This final section prepares the readers for chapter 3, which is your methodology chapter, or your chapter 1 for more alignment, right? And I think from here, we now go back to chapter 1. Anything else to add, Jessica, before we go to chapter 1?
Yeah, I think the word alignment is exactly correct here, because it's important to keep the language in mind that you define here in this chapter and use the same wording in your introduction. You're going to now be writing your problem statement in different sections of your proposal, but you want to use the same language. You don't want to change around terminology and have slightly different or nuanced research problems defined in different parts. You actually want to keep the language the same and restate that in your introduction. This is going to be the wording that you properly define and stick to for the rest of the document, and then you'll be using the same in your actual thesis.
Yeah, on the same lines, we may have seen that the research questions are of one set, which have nothing to do with the themes that's written in the literature review sometimes, right? So it's like you said, that alignment is so crucial between all the chapters, not just chapter 2 and 1, but chapter 1, 2, 3, and later 4 and 5 when you have your findings and your conclusion. So the alignment is like so crucial. And thanks for mentioning that, Jessica. It's very, very important. Now, we're going back to chapter number 1, and we've already explained that briefly, that the chapter 1, sort of the thinking framework that you can have. Earlier, I used to mention more of like a reverse pyramid approach, but I think funnel makes more sense, more like broad to narrow. Jessica, do you want to just go over some of the funnels that we have built in here?
Yeah, sure, I can do that. So for the chapter 1, as Anand said, we also think in this kind of funnel approach, the same as chapter 2. That you want to start with the largest concept and then narrow it down to be very, very focused. So the sections that we're going to see in the introduction chapter actually set out for you in this table as a summary. So then afterwards you see that we actually provide examples, but we'll just talk through the table right now. So you're going to start wide with the first section to provide background and context. Very important here, you don't want to be repeating what you've written in your literature review. We often see this where people are kind of rewriting the literature survey in the introduction. This is not what you want. You just want to very efficiently write context for the problem. So you give a brief introduction of an overview and set the context for the problem. Then in a second section, at section 1.2, you're going to be narrowing a little bit and you're going to state what the problem is. So here you're going to identify the specific issues that you want to address in the study, but it's not yet defining your research question. This comes a little bit later on. So here you're just stating the general problem, and that is followed by stating the purpose of the study. So here you will give an overview of what the study intends to do, and you'll follow that up with even more narrow focus of the research question and the research objectives. So the research question is very similar to your problem statement, but phrased as a question. And from that question, we then define research objectives. And these research objectives will then guide you towards the methodology, or in the methodology. It will help you select what methods to use, what kind of data to accumulate, and how to deal with that. So following the research objectives, then what you want to do is you want to provide a summary of why the study is significant. Here again, this is a little bit of a repetition of what you've done in the literature review. So here you just want to briefly introduce and very clearly emphasize and demonstrate the significance of the study. So you want to say, like, why is it applicable? Why is it needed? Why is it important? Who will benefit from this research and how can they apply it? You really want to sell your research in this part. And then finally, you'll end this chapter, that's the introductory chapter, with a short summary to close the funnel and just bring everything together and re-emphasize the need for your research.
Yeah, what's important to avoid here is turning chapter 1 into literature review or trying to answer your research questions too early. Like, if you're citing extensively or explaining theories in depth in your chapter 1, you're probably doing the work of chapter 2 in your chapter 1. Always keep this in mind. Chapter 1 is all about clarity. It's about direction. Please don't overload that with evidence, like too many citations on explaining the theories or trying to answer even the research questions too early on. Like, it's really, chapter 1 is all about like keeping the readers excited to read further about your research, if that makes sense.
Yes, and it also cuts out repetition. If you have said something in the literature review, you don't want to also say the same thing in the introduction, except if it serves the purpose of introducing the context. So the bulk of your proposal will be chapter 2 and chapter 3, and the introduction will really be a couple of pages. It shouldn't be the same length as the literature review. If it comes to that, you've done too much. You really don't want too much information repeating between the chapters, because you want, as you've said, Anand, you want your reader to be excited to read the literature review after they've read the introduction. That's why also we really recommend writing it after the literature review, so that you can basically write it as a summary.
Absolutely. We have provided some guidance points and some examples for the students to refer to. All right, discussing chapter 3, which is our methodology. Understand the purpose of this chapter is not to impress with methods or tools. It's there to explain clearly and logically how you plan to answer your research questions. That's it. A core principle we emphasize in this template is decision before writing for chapter 3. So your methodology should follow from your research problem and questions that you have identified from your literature review, not based on your preferred tools or softwares. So this is why we introduce a simple methodological thinking framework in this template that moves from your research problem to the data that's needed to the most appropriate approach that you can use to answer your research questions. So once again, alignment is so critical here. Your research questions, the type of data that you collect, and the methods that you use all need to fit together.
Maybe I can just add that the goal is to present a chapter that is well thought through. You want your methodology to look like something that's really intentional and well thought through, instead of something shiny and flashy with fancy methodology. And that won't impress as much as presenting a methodology that's really well thought through and well justified.
Absolutely. And your step 1 is pretty basic. You start asking these 3 questions. Am I trying to explore experiences, meanings, or processes? Or am I trying to measure the relationships, effects, or differences? Or am I trying both? Depending upon the answer, you may end up deciding to go with a qualitative approach, a quantitative approach, or you may have to do a mix of both, which we call as mixed methods. So that's the step number 1 is how do you want to answer your research questions, right? And also feels like sometimes you get clues about the kind of methods that you would like to use from your literature reviews, isn't it?
Oh yes, for sure. It's very important to consider what people have used in studies that are similar to yours. And if you don't use the same methodology, then motivate why you choose something else. Or if you will use the same methodology, motivate how you will change it in order to specifically answer your question. Maybe you have to translate a survey into a local language, but you will have to motivate that who are you modeling your work on and why or not, and how will you adapt to answer or to be specific to your approach.
Also, emphasizing on literature review, that's also the point where you sometimes see some of the survey tools that they have used, like some of the survey instruments, the questionnaires. You may be able to reuse some of them in your own research, right? So it's so important that you keep an eye out when you do your literature review to understand what kind of methodology did other researchers follow. Step number 2 is really to decide what kind of data you need. So your research questions basically determine the type of data you need. Ask yourself, do my questions require more words, explanation and narratives? Then it makes sense that you rely on a qualitative approach like a survey or a focus group sessions, right? If it's more like numbers, comparison, statistical testing, it makes sense that you stick to a qualitative approach. Again, more of like survey, but you're playing more with numbers. And step 4 is basically decide who and what will you study, right? Ask questions like, who is best positioned to provide you the data that you need? If you're doing a PhD in education, would the university that you study be able to circulate the survey among the students? And you have to ask this question, can I realistically access the data?
It's a good idea in this section to also consider ethical requirements from your university. So it's important to be educated on that at this point. And should there be potential problems, also have a possible contingency plan in place. And you might want to include that in this chapter. So, for example, if you are planning a survey and you think about things that could go wrong, present possible solutions. This will help you present something that seems well thought through. And that's a good approach to think about possible limitations, both defining the borders of the study as well as things that could go wrong.
Absolutely. Ask the question, what is the most direct and ethical way to obtain this data? For examples, interviews for in-depth understanding, some of the questionnaires for broader patterns and comparisons. Can you look into some documents or records, when access to participants is basically limited? So ask that question, how will you collect the data? And step 6 is how the data will be analyzed, which is probably the easiest. And finally, it's about check the feasibility, which I think is very, very crucial. Can I realistically access the data? I think this is probably something that most students kind of overlook. You have some level of certainty that you are able to access the data, but even then, I suggest that you have a plan in place. I've seen some students say things like, I'll do a survey in the state of California for the people who work for the IT sector, who have 20 years of experience, currently manage roles. You're not going to make it because it's very hard unless you have such inroads in the sector or in the industry. So just make sure whatever you write down, it's realistic. Can I complete the study within the time frame? This is very crucial again. Some data collection takes months, perhaps even years. So if you're doing a master's program, be very careful. Make sure you have the necessary support to do it. And I wrote that one line that says, if the answer to any of these questions is no, please revisit the earlier steps and make the changes.
I want to add here to the last feasibility step. It's important to keep in mind that things will go wrong. So as I said before, have contingency plans in place. Think ahead a little bit about things that could go wrong. As you said, maybe you have defined a very specific group of respondents that you want to communicate to. If those are not accessible, what will you do? But I also want to stress here that this chapter 3, your methodology, is a little bit like your title. It's not going to be conclusive. You will probably adapt this as you following feedback from your supervisory committee or from the review panel. So you still want to make sure that you present something well thought through, but be aware of the fact that it's probably going to morph and change a couple of times during the process, from presenting the proposal until submitting your final thesis.
Absolutely. So that's the outline of the research methodology. We've given you some guidance points and some sample text for you to refer to. It usually starts with an introduction to the chapter, followed by the research design and approach. All of this are basically decided from the table that we have given earlier. The decisions are already made, then the writing becomes more easy. And then you have the research context and participants, the data collection methods that you would follow, data analysis, the ethical considerations, the ethics. Some of the US, Canadian universities uses the IRB approvals. So just make sure that's in place if that's applicable. The methodological rigor and limitations. Like any study would have some level of limitations. So you should be clear on what those are and the summary of the chapter. So that's all about chapter 3. Anything last thoughts on chapter 3, Jessica?
For me, I follow the structure that we present here in the template as a guideline to help you formulate your methodology in a way that flows from larger to most focused, because you will use your research questions to guide you in what you pick, as we've said at the beginning of this section. And this template is really there to help you structure your course in such a way that it reads and writes easily.
Absolutely. Then moving on, it's time to talk about your research timeline. Usually that's included either in your research proposal or proposal defense. So the research timeline is included to show that your project is realistic and it is manageable. So this proposal stage, you don't have to add detailed dates. You just need to map out the main phases of your work, such as reviewing literature, collecting the data, analyzing it, and writing in your program time frame. If you look at the table in the template, use it to think through the sequence of the task rather than the exact timing. Build some flexibility into it, allow some time for revisions, and also avoid planning everything. A clear, realistic timeline reassures the reader and your committee members or your professor that your study can actually be completed within the time frame that's allowed for your program.
Yeah, you want to demonstrate that it's doable in the time that you have. A well-developed timeline illustrates that you've thought through the tasks properly and that you are time aware. You want to be ambitious, but you also want to be reasonable.
Absolutely. Moving on, this is perhaps my favorite part, is more about reference management. References right from the beginning will save you a huge amount of time later. Most of the students I do coaching to prepare their research proposal, or even sometimes halfway through their research, or there's a thesis writing, I ask them the question like, do you use any reference managers? I would say 40% of the time, they have not heard about any softwares. Sometimes they're using the existing Word plugins or manually insert citations, like telling you like it saves a huge amount of your time later. So start using some sort of referencing tool for your reference management. It actually helps you avoid missing citations, formatting errors, and any last minute stresses. It also makes writing and revising much easier as your thesis writing or your dissertation grows. In this template, I have provided a few different softwares. Honestly, you could stick to Zotero, Mentally, or EndNote. It really doesn't matter. Most of them have similar features. What's your favorite, Jessica?
I use Mentally, but I like Zotero. Yeah, okay. I think it's very functional. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah, I like Mentally more, although I'm not really recommended, but I've used Mentally throughout my research.
Yes, I think a small note that I want to add here is to double check the capturing of information, because just make sure it'll save you a lot of time if you double check at the moment of import that the information is captured correctly, so that you won't have to go back at the end and correct manually. This step could save a lot of time.
Absolutely. Just to clarify that, Jessica's explaining that if you have not used this tool, as you drag and drop your PDF into the software, it automatically captures all the necessary information like title, journal name, published year, DOI, right? So what Jessica is asking is to ensure that the data that has been auto-captured by the software is accurate. Because if it is not accurate, your list of references will be messed up. Likely your in-text citation will be messed up. But the beauty is, as you correct them manually within the software, it auto-updates inside your Word documents. It's still brilliant. Piecing this all together, a strong research proposal works because all sections connect logically. The problem leads to literature, the literature leads to methodology, and the methodology leads to a feasible plan. At the proposal stage, what matters the most is clarity. You're not trying to say everything. You're trying to say the right things clearly and coherently. Finally, expect iteration. We have seen students have to go through revisions, feedback, and that's part of the process. Proposals are refined through supervisor feedback, not perfected in one draft. So if you feel like it's too much, just part of the process. And you can use this structure in the template to guide revisions and keep your thinking aligned as the proposal evolves. Any last thoughts here, Jessica?
Yeah, actually, I want to add that what you said is so important. You are probably going to be redoing a couple of runs through this. Iterations, changes, adaptations. So if you have harsh feedback, this is completely normal. Take it as help. Don't take it personally. And then what's really useful is to have a second pair of eyes or even a second pair of ears listen to and look over your work. Because often we get lost in our heads, and it's so useful to have someone else see if the way you structured your thoughts and your argument actually makes sense. So it's so useful to talk through your proposal with a friend or a family member. And there is this, they call it the grandma rule, that I like a lot. If you're able to explain to your grandma in 30 seconds what you are trying to study and why, and she can understand it, or a 5-year-old, then you know that you've done a good job. So really useful to have someone look over your work and see if the way you have structured your thoughts actually makes sense to communicate and express the thing that you wish to express.
Absolutely. So before we wrap up, it's important to remember that the proposal writing is a thinking process, not a test of your perfection. Feeling uncertain or needing to revise your ideas is not a sign that you're doing something wrong. It's just part of the process. Take your time working through each section, and when you're ready, move on to the next video or checklist to continue building your proposal step by step. So you don't need to rush this. You need a structure you can trust.